Your boyfriend is seeing my wife." The words landed on me like a glass of ice water thrown directly in my face. I sat there in the crowded cafe on a Saturday afternoon in Portland, Oregon, my latte growing cold in my hands, staring at the man who had just taken the seat across from me without invitation. He was handsome in a way that made you look twice, with dark hair slightly tousled and eyes the color of whiskey held up to the light. He wore a casual blazer over a fitted gray shirt, and everything about him screamed confidence bordering on arrogance. "Excuse me?" I managed, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. He leaned back in the wooden chair, studying my face with an expression that mixed amusement with something darker. "I said your boyfriend, the guy you've been dating for what, 3 years now? He's been sleeping with my wife for the past 8 months. Give or take." I opened my mouth to respond, to defend, to do something, but no words came out. The cafe buzzed around us with the sounds of espresso machines and casual conversation, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just tilted on its axis. "How do you know who I am?" I finally asked, because that seemed like the safest question, the easiest one, not the one that mattered. "I've been following the breadcrumbs for weeks now. Credit card statements, phone records, the usual detective work that comes with suspecting your spouse of infidelity." He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table toward me. "Your boyfriend's name is Joel. You've been together since you were 26. You work at a marketing firm downtown, and every Saturday you come to this exact cafe at exactly 2 p.m. to drink a vanilla latte and read whatever book is currently sitting in your bag." I felt exposed, stripped bare by a stranger who somehow knew the rhythms of my life better than I did. "My name is Alicia, and I had walked into this cafe 30 minutes ago believing I lived a perfectly ordinary life. A good life, even. Joel and I had our issues, sure, but every couple did. We had been together long enough that the passion had settled into something comfortable, something sustainable. Or so I had convinced myself. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my hands trembling slightly as I pushed his phone back toward him without looking at the screen. I was not ready to see whatever evidence lived there. He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face from intimidating to devastatingly charming. "Because misery loves company, I suppose. And because when I saw you sitting here alone, looking like a woman who deserves far better than what she's getting, I thought maybe we could help each other." "Help each other how?" He leaned forward, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive. "Forget him. Come out with me tonight. Let's make them wonder where we are for once." Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to get up, to walk away, to call Joel immediately and demand an explanation. But there was another part, a part I had buried for years, that felt something electric move through me at this stranger's proposition. It was reckless. It was probably dangerous. And it was the first time in longer than I could remember that I felt genuinely alive. "I don't even know your name," I said. "Evan." He extended his hand across the table, and when I took it, his grip was warm and firm. "So, what do you say, Alicia? Are you ready to blow your world open?" I should have said no. I should have gathered my things and walked out of that cafe and confronted Joel with whatever evidence this man claimed to have. That would have been the sensible choice, the mature choice. But I had been making sensible choices my entire life, and where had they gotten me? Sitting alone in a coffee shop, while my boyfriend of 3 years apparently warmed someone else's bed. "What time?" I heard myself say. Evan's smile widened. "I'll pick you up at 8. Wear something that makes you feel powerful." He stood, dropping a business card on the table beside my untouched latte. "My number's on there, in case you change your mind. But Alicia, I really hope you don't." And then he was gone, weaving through the Saturday crowd like a man who knew exactly where he was going, leaving me alone with a cold coffee and the first crack forming in a life I had thought was stable. I sat in that cafe for another hour after Evan left, turning his business card over in my fingers and watching the words blur through unshed tears. The card was simple, elegant. Just his name and a phone number. No company logo or title. It told me nothing and everything at the same time. This was a man who operated on his own terms. But it was not Evan I was thinking about as the afternoon light shifted through the windows and the cafe began to empty. It was Joel. It was the past 3 years of my life, spread out before me like a tapestry I was suddenly seeing from a different angle, noticing all the threads I had missed. When had the distance started? I tried to pinpoint the moment, the day when Joel had begun to drift, but the truth was more insidious than that. There was no single moment. Instead, there had been a slow erosion, a gradual withdrawal that I had explained away with work stress, with his natural introversion, with the simple fact that relationships mature and passion fades. I thought about the nights he had worked late, coming home smelling like nothing in particular, kissing my forehead with lips that never quite warmed. I thought about the weekends when he had golf games with friends I had never met, returning with stories that felt rehearsed. I thought about the way he looked at his phone sometimes, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and how I had convinced myself it was just a funny email from a coworker. The signs had been there. They had always been there. I had simply chosen not to see them. What struck me most, sitting in that cafe with the weight of betrayal settling on my shoulders, was not the anger I expected to feel. It was the quiet recognition that I had been dissatisfied for far longer than I had admitted to myself. Joel and I had built a life together, yes, but it was a life that felt like wearing shoes one size too small. Functional, but never comfortable. I had learned to walk in them, to ignore the pinch, to tell myself that this was simply what adult relationships looked like. I thought about my own ambitions, the dreams I had shelved in favor of stability. When Joel and I first met, I had been burning with plans. I wanted to start my own consulting firm, to travel to places I had only read about, to write the novel that had lived in my head since college. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had gotten smaller and smaller, tucked away in boxes I never opened, until I forgot they existed at all. It was easier, I realized, to shrink myself than to admit I was unhappy. Easier to play the role of the supportive girlfriend than to confront the emptiness that had been growing inside me like mold in a dark corner. I had convinced myself that what I had was enough because the alternative, acknowledging that I deserved more, felt too terrifying to consider. Now, sitting in the ruins of that delusion, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The thought startled me so much that I actually laughed out loud, drawing curious glances from the barista cleaning tables nearby. Here I was, having just learned that my boyfriend had been unfaithful for the better part of a year, and instead of collapsing into devastation, I felt lighter than I had in months. It was as if Evan's revelation had given me permission to feel things I had been suppressing for years. The frustration with Joel's emotional unavailability, the resentment over sacrifices he never noticed, the loneliness of lying next to someone who felt more like a roommate than a partner. All of it came flooding to the surface, no longer denied or rationalized, just acknowledged for the first time. I pulled out my phone and stared at Joel's contact photo. It was an old picture, taken during a trip to the coast early in our relationship, back when he still looked at me like I mattered. I could not remember the last time he had looked at me that way. Could not remember the last time I had felt truly seen by him. My finger hovered over the call button. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand explanations and apologies and all the things I was supposedly entitled to as the wronged party. But another part, the part that had felt that electric thrill when Evan issued his invitation, wanted something different. I wanted proof, first. I wanted to see for myself what Evan claimed to know. And more than that, I wanted to understand who I was without Joel, before I decided what to do next. I put my phone away and finally took a sip of my cold latte. It was bitter and disappointing, much like the relationship I was suddenly questioning. But there was something clarifying about the taste, something that felt like waking up. 8 o'clock. I had 6 hours to decide what kind of woman I wanted to be when I walked out my door tonight. 6 hours to figure out if I was brave enough to stop settling for enough and start reaching for something more. I went home to the apartment Joel and I shared, moving through the familiar space like a detective examining a crime scene. Everything looked different now, every object holding potential evidence of a double life I had been too blind to see. His gym bag by the door that he grabbed for workouts that always seemed to run long. The bathroom where he spent extra time getting ready on nights he claimed he was meeting old college friends. The phone charger on his nightstand, always positioned so the screen faced away from me. Joel was not home. He had texted earlier saying he would be working late on a project, a message I had accepted without question countless times before. Now those words read like a confession written in invisible ink. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, looking at the bed where we had slept side by side for 3 years, and felt like a stranger in my own life. The comforter was the one I had picked out, a soft blue that Joel had said was fine. The pillows were arranged the way I liked them, because Joel never bothered to make the bed himself. The framed photos on the dresser documented a relationship that now felt like a performance rather than a partnership. I should wait, I told myself. I should wait until I could think clearly, until the shock had worn off and I could approach this rationally. But my feet carried me to Joel's desk in the corner of the room, to the laptop he always left open when he was home, secured with a password I had known for years because he had never bothered to change it after telling me once. His email was open when the screen flickered to life. The most recent message was from someone named Diana, sent just 3 hours ago. The subject line read simply, "Tonight?" I clicked on it with fingers that had gone numb. The message was short but devastating. "Miss you already. Can you get away after dinner? I'll leave the door unlocked." There was nothing explicit in the words themselves, but the intimacy they conveyed was unmistakable. This was not the language of colleagues or casual acquaintances. This was the shorthand of lovers who had been navigating deception for months. I scrolled down through the thread, watching the story of my boyfriend's affair unfold in real time. Restaurant recommendations and hotel bookings. Inside jokes I did not understand. Complaints about spouses, plural, that made my stomach turn. Joel talked about me the way you might discuss a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. She doesn't notice anything anymore. I could be gone for days and she'd just assume I was busy. It's almost too easy. Too easy. That was what I had been. Too easy. Too trusting. Too willing to accept whatever scraps of attention he threw my way. I found photos next, buried in a folder marked work documents with such lazy deception that it almost felt insulting. Diana was beautiful in the way that made you immediately feel inadequate. Blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, a smile that belonged in a magazine, a body that suggested hours at the gym. She was everything I was not, and seeing her face made the betrayal feel visceral in a way the emails had not. This was real. Evan had not lied to me in that cafe. My boyfriend, the man I had built my life around for 3 years, had been building a secret life with another woman's husband's wife. The irony was not lost on me. 2 marriages, 2 partnerships, all 4 people affected by 2 selfish individuals who wanted more than what they had. I closed the laptop and sat back in Joel's chair, waiting for the heartbreak to arrive, waiting for the tears and the devastation and the desperate need to understand why I was not enough. But those feelings never came. Instead, what washed over me was that same unexpected thrill I had felt in the cafe, amplified now by certainty. This was my exit. This was the door I had been too afraid to walk through on my own, now blown wide open by forces beyond my control. I did not have to stay. I did not have to keep shrinking myself to fit into a relationship that had stopped serving me years ago. Joel had given me the ultimate gift, even if he did not know it. He had given me permission to leave. I looked at my phone and saw that it was nearly 7. 1 hour until Evan would be picking me up for a night I could not begin to predict. 1 hour to decide if I was going to answer Joel's betrayal with my own revenge, or if I was going to take the higher road and walk away with dignity intact. But as I moved through our shared closet, searching for something that would make me feel powerful the way Evan had instructed, I realized that revenge and self-respect did not have to be mutually exclusive. Going out with Evan was not about hurting Joel. It was about reminding myself that I was worth someone's undivided attention, that I deserved to be chosen, to be prioritized, to be seen as more than a convenience. I found a dress I had bought 2 years ago and never worn, a deep burgundy number that Joel had said was too much for my usual life. Too much. I had let those words keep that dress hanging untouched in the back of my closet, waiting for an occasion that never came. Tonight, I decided as I held it up to myself in the mirror, was that occasion. I was not going to cry over Joel's betrayal. I was not going to beg for explanations or second chances. I was going to walk out of this apartment in an hour, looking like a woman who had finally woken up to her own worth, and I was going to step into whatever world Evan was offering, even if it terrified me. My phone buzzed with a text. Evan's number. Still on for tonight? I smiled at my reflection, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. She seemed bolder somehow, more alive. I texted back, "Pick me up at 8. I'll be ready." And for the first time in years, I actually meant it. Evan arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, pulling up to my building in a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than my annual salary. I watched from the window as he stepped out, checking his phone before looking up toward my apartment with an expression I could not quite read. He was wearing a dark suit now, tailored perfectly to his frame, and I felt a flutter of something dangerous move through me. This was either the bravest thing I had ever done or the stupidest. Possibly both. Joel had texted twice since I started getting ready. Casual messages about his project running late and asking if I wanted him to pick up dinner on his way home. The lies rolled off his phone so effortlessly that I wondered how I had ever believed a word he said. I had responded with short acknowledgments, giving nothing away. And then I had walked out of our apartment looking like a woman who had somewhere important to be. "You came," Evan said when I reached the street, his eyes traveling over my dress with obvious appreciation. "I wasn't entirely sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. "But I figured if my life is going to fall apart tonight anyway, I might as well have a good story to tell about it." He laughed, a warm sound that seemed at odds with the cold circumstances that had brought us together. "Fair enough. Shall we?" He opened the passenger door for me, a small gesture of chivalry that Joel had abandoned somewhere around month 6 of our relationship. As I slid into the leather seat, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked determined. Dangerous, even. Evan took me to a restaurant I had never heard of, tucked away in a neighborhood I rarely visited. The kind of place that did not have prices on the menu and expected you to know what a wine flight was without explanation. The hostess greeted him by name, leading us to a corner table with candles and crisp white linens. "Come here often?" I asked, settling into my seat. "When I need to feel like myself again," he said, which, lately, has been often. We ordered wine and appetizers, making small talk that felt too normal for the circumstances. He asked about my job, my hobbies, the book I had been reading in the cafe that afternoon. I found myself answering honestly, sharing pieces of myself that I usually kept hidden behind the mask of being Joel's girlfriend. It was not until our entrees arrived that Evan finally addressed the elephant in the room. "You found proof," he said, not a question. "I can see it on your face." "How could you tell?" "Because you look relieved instead of devastated. That's the look of a woman who finally has permission to feel what she's been suppressing." He took a sip of his wine, studying me over the rim. "What did you find?" I told him about the emails, the photos, the lazy deception that had been hiding in plain sight. Speaking the words out loud made them feel more real, but also somehow less painful. This was not my secret shame to carry. This was Joel's failure, not mine. "Diana has been sloppy too," Evan said when I finished. Credit card charges at hotels she claimed to be nowhere near. Perfume on clothes she supposedly bought for herself. I think part of her wanted to get caught. Maybe part of Joel did too. What made you start looking in the first place? He set down his glass, his expression shifting to something more vulnerable than I had seen from him. She stopped touching me. Not all at once, but gradually, like turning down a dimmer switch. At first I convinced myself it was stress, or that all marriages go through phases. But then I noticed she was different with her phone. Secretive. And once you start noticing things like that, you can't stop. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. When did you find out for sure? 3 weeks ago. I hired someone to follow her, which I know sounds extreme. But I needed to know if I was going crazy or if my instincts were right. He met my eyes, and I saw pain there that he was working hard to conceal. My instincts were right. We sat in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by the same betrayal, trying to figure out what came next. The restaurant hummed around us with the sounds of other diners living their ordinary lives, oblivious to the wreckage being sorted through at our corner table. "Why did you approach me today?" I asked finally. "You could have just confronted them both and been done with it." Evan smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. "Because I saw you sitting there looking so perfectly composed, and I recognized something in you. That careful contentment that people wear when they're afraid to want more. I wore it for years in my marriage. And I thought maybe if you knew what I knew, you'd realize you deserve better than what you're settling for." "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to. If you'll let me." It was a line, probably. A move in whatever game he was playing. But sitting across from him in that beautiful restaurant, wearing the dress I had been told was too much, I realized I did not care. For one night, I wanted to be someone who said yes to possibility instead of no to risk. "Okay," I said. "Show me what happens next." The night unfolded like a dream I did not want to wake from. After dinner, Evan took me to a jazz club he knew, the kind of place where the music wrapped around you like velvet, and no one asked questions about why two strangers were sitting so close together in a dark corner booth. We talked for hours, the words flowing easier than they had with anyone in longer than I could remember. He told me about his marriage, how he and Diana had met young and ambitious, building a life together that looked perfect from the outside. They had bought a house in the suburbs, accumulated friends who were really just other couples going through the motions, and somewhere along the way had forgotten why they had chosen each other in the first place. We stopped being partners and started being roommates, he said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. I'd come home from work, and she'd be watching television, and we'd exchange maybe 10 words before going to sleep in the same bed like strangers. I kept thinking that's just what marriage becomes after enough years. That passion was something you traded for stability. When did you realize you were wrong? When I found the first email. His jaw tightened. She had written to Joel about how alive he made her feel, how she hadn't known she could still want someone that way. And I realized she had never written anything like that about me, not even at the beginning. I was always the safe choice, not the exciting one. I reached across the table and touched his hand, an impulse that surprised us both. That's not true. She just stopped choosing you, and that says more about her than it does about you. He looked at my hand on his, then up at my face, and something shifted in his expression. The carefully constructed confidence cracked for just a moment, revealing the wounded man beneath. You know what the worst part is? He said quietly. I'm not even sure I'm angry anymore. I'm just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of hoping things will change. Tired of being someone's backup plan while they chase someone else. I understand that more than you know. Do you still love him? Joel? The question caught me off guard, and I had to sit with it for a moment. really examining my feelings for the first time. I thought I did. For years, I would have said yes without hesitating. But looking back now, I think I loved the idea of him more than the reality. The idea of having a partner, of being chosen, of not being alone. The actual man never quite lived up to what I needed him to be. That's heartbreaking, Evan said. Maybe. Or maybe it's freeing. Because if I never really loved him, then losing him isn't actually losing much at all. The jazz band shifted into something slower, more melancholic, and for a while we just sat there, two people processing grief that felt oddly shared. I had walked into this night expecting closure, expecting answers, expecting the kind of confrontation that would give me permission to move on. Instead, I had found something more complicated, a connection that felt dangerous precisely because it felt so real. Diana doesn't know that I know, Evan said eventually. I've been waiting for the right moment to confront her, but the truth is, I'm not sure what I want that moment to look like. Anger? Sadness? I can't seem to find the right emotion for the occasion. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe betrayal is just too complicated for a single feeling. He nodded slowly. When are you going to tell Joel? I don't know. Part of me wants to walk back into that apartment tonight and lay out every piece of evidence, watch him scramble for excuses. But another part of me thinks that would give him too much satisfaction. He'd get to be the victim then, the one who was attacked and accused, and somehow he'd twist it to make me the bad guy. What if you didn't give him that chance? What do you mean? Evan leaned forward, his eyes intense. What if you just left? No confrontation, no explanation, no opportunity for him to manipulate the narrative. You pack your things while he's at work. You disappear from his life the same way he disappeared from yours emotionally, and you let him wonder forever what he did wrong. The idea was appealing in its simplicity. No dramatic scene, no tears, no begging for answers that would never satisfy. Just a clean break, a closed door, a final refusal to participate in his deception. Could you do that? I asked. With Diana. I've been thinking about it. Walking away without giving her the satisfaction of seeing how much she hurt me, he paused. But I'm not sure I'm strong enough yet. Maybe that's why we found each other, I said. So we didn't have to be strong alone. The words hung between us, charged with possibility. This was moving fast, too fast, and I knew I should pump the brakes, should put some distance between myself and this man who was technically still married to someone else. But the warmth of his hand under mine, the understanding in his eyes, the simple fact that he had seen my pain and chosen to share his own rather than exploit it, made slowing down feel impossible. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow, we face reality. But tonight, we deserve this. Whatever this is. I did not go home that night. Evan drove me to a hotel instead, insisting on getting me my own room despite the obvious tension that had been building between us. He walked me to my door, and for a long moment we just stood there, the hallway quiet and the air thick with everything unsaid. I want to kiss you, he admitted. But I think we both need to end our old lives before we start something new. Probably the smart choice. I'm trying to be a gentleman. It's harder than I expected. I laughed, and it felt good, natural, like a language I had forgotten how to speak. Thank you for tonight, for telling me the truth, for not letting me waste another day in that relationship. Thank you for not running away when I ambushed you in that cafe. He kissed my cheek, his lips lingering just long enough to make my pulse jump. And then he was walking back down the hallway, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the strange reality of my new circumstances. I did not sleep well. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Joel's emails, Diana's photos, the life I had been living as a fiction. But mixed in with the pain was something else. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of it. The next morning, I checked my phone to find a dozen messages from Joel. Increasingly worried, increasingly frantic. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? I'm calling the police if you don't respond. The performance of a concerned boyfriend was almost impressive, given what I now knew about his extracurricular activities. I sent a single text. I'm fine. I'll be home this afternoon. We need to talk. Then I silenced my phone and ordered room service, giving myself one more hour of peace before I had to face the chaos waiting for me. When I finally walked into our apartment around 2 p.m., Joel was pacing the living room like a caged animal. His face lit up with relief when he saw me, quickly morphing into something harder, more controlled. Where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick. Have you? I asked calmly, setting down my purse. Of course I have. You disappeared without a word. Wouldn't answer your phone. I thought something terrible had happened to you. I looked at this man I had shared my life with for 3 years, really looked at him, and felt nothing but contempt. Every word out of his mouth was a performance, a manipulation designed to position him as the wounded party. The audacity of it took my breath away. I know about Diana, I said simply. The color drained from his face. For 3 full seconds he just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Then the excuses started, tumbling out so fast they tripped over each other. Alicia, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. Diana and we're just friends, I swear. Someone is lying to you, trying to break us up. You have to believe me. I read your emails, Joel. I saw the photos. I know exactly what you and Diana have been doing for the past 8 months. His expression shifted then, the mask slipping to reveal something uglier beneath. You went through my computer. How dare you invade my privacy like that? Your privacy? I laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. You've been sleeping with another man's wife for almost a year, lying to me every single day, and you want to talk about privacy? Alicia, please. He stepped toward me, reaching for my hands, and I stepped back. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. She doesn't mean anything to me. You're the one I love. Let's just forget this happened and move forward. We can start fresh, just the 2 of us. There it was. The offer I would have accepted 6 months ago. Maybe even 6 days ago. The promise of reconciliation, of working through our problems, of choosing the relationship over the individual. The old Alicia would have been tempted by that offer. She would have wanted to believe that love could survive betrayal, that forgiveness was always the higher road. But the old Alicia was gone. She had died in that cafe when a handsome stranger told her the truth, and the woman who had taken her place was not interested in starting fresh with someone who had never been fully present to begin with. No, I said. No? Joel looked stunned. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm done. With this relationship, with this apartment, with the version of myself who kept making excuses for your emotional absence. I moved past him toward the bedroom, where I planned to start packing. I'll have my things out by the end of the week. Alicia, wait! He grabbed my arm, his grip too tight. You can't just walk away from 3 years like this. We have a life together, a future. Are you really going to throw all of that away? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his desperate face, and felt nothing but pity. For both of us, really. For the years we had wasted pretending to be something we never were. You threw it away, Joel. I'm just finally acknowledging what's already broken. I pulled my arm free and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. Through the wood, I could hear him ranting, alternating between apologies and accusations, but his voice seemed to come from very far away, a different lifetime maybe. I pulled out my phone and texted Evan. It's done. He didn't take it well. His response came immediately. Neither did Diana. Drinks tonight? I smiled despite everything, despite the destruction of my old life, despite the uncertainty of what came next. despite all the rational reasons I should be falling apart. "Absolutely," I typed back. "Pick me up at 8. The next few weeks were a blur of boxes and lawyers and uncomfortable conversations. I moved out of Joel's apartment and into a small studio near the waterfront, a space that was entirely mine for the first time in years. The walls were bare and the furniture was secondhand, but every morning I woke up there I felt lighter, freer, more myself than I had in longer than I could remember. Evan and I saw each other almost every day. We were careful to keep things appropriate, both of us technically still untangling from our previous lives, but the connection between us grew stronger with each conversation. He was navigating his own separation from Diana, a process that had turned ugly quickly once the affair was out in the open. "She's claiming I drove her to it," he told me one evening over dinner. "Says I was emotionally unavailable, that I worked too much, that I never made her feel wanted. And you know what? Maybe some of that is true, but it doesn't excuse what she did. It's easier for her to blame you than to take responsibility for her choices. The same way Joel is telling everyone you're the one who abandoned him, that you were never truly committed to the relationship." I nodded. Word had gotten back to me through mutual friends that Joel was rewriting history, casting himself as the devoted boyfriend whose girlfriend had inexplicably walked away. He never mentioned Diana, of course, never acknowledged that his own betrayal was what had finally opened my eyes. "Let him spin whatever story he wants," I said. "The people who matter know the truth." Evan reached across the table and took my hand. We had started doing that. Small touches that bridged the gap between friendship and something more. Neither of us was ready to put a label on what we were becoming, but we both knew it was heading somewhere important. "My lawyer says the divorce should be finalized within 2 months," he said. "Diana's fighting over the house, but I'm willing to let her have it. I'd rather walk away clean than spend another year in court battles. Are you sure? That house was your home for 7 years. It was the place I lived. There's a difference." He squeezed my hand. "Home is something I'm still figuring out." I understood that feeling intimately. Home was not a building or an address. It was a feeling of belonging, of being truly known and accepted. I had never felt that with Joel, no matter how much I had tried to convince myself otherwise. "I've been thinking about making some changes," I said. "At work, in my life generally. Being unhappy for so long made me forget what I actually wanted." "What do you want?" It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked me that? When was the last time I had asked myself? "I want to start my own consulting firm," I said slowly, the dream I had buried for years finally clawing its way to the surface. "I want to work with clients I actually believe in, on my own terms. I want to travel, to write, to do all the things I put aside because they didn't fit into the life I was supposed to be living." "Then do them," Evan said simply. "It's not that easy." "Why not?" I opened my mouth to list all the reasons, the practical considerations, the financial risks, the fear of failure that had kept me small for so long. But looking into Evan's eyes, I realized none of those reasons were good enough anymore. I had already survived the worst thing I could imagine, the complete destruction of the life I thought I wanted. Everything else was just details. "You're right," I said, surprising us both. "Why not?" It was Evan's idea to confront Joel and Diana together. Not out of malice, he explained, but out of a desire for closure. We deserved to look them in the eyes and speak our truth, to reclaim the narrative they had tried to control. We arranged to meet them at a restaurant none of us had been to before, neutral territory for what was sure to be an uncomfortable conversation. Joel arrived first, looking uncomfortable in a blazer he'd clearly borrowed from someone, his face a mask of righteous indignation. Diana came in a few minutes later, beautiful and cold, sizing me up with eyes that held no remorse. "This is ridiculous," Joel started before anyone else could speak. What exactly is the point of this little ambush? The point, Evan said calmly, is that you two blew up 4 lives and you don't seem to understand the gravity of what you did. We're not here to yell or cry or beg for apologies we'll never get. We're here to tell you exactly what your choices cost. Diana rolled her eyes. Please, spare me the self-righteous lecture. Marriages end. People move on. That's life. Marriages end when both people agree they're over, I said. What you did was steal time from us. You let us invest in relationships you had already abandoned. Let us plan futures you knew would never happen. That's not just betrayal, that's cruelty. Don't be dramatic, Joel muttered. Dramatic? I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. I gave you 3 years of my life, Joel. 3 years of putting your needs before mine. Of shrinking myself to fit into your expectations. Of believing the lie that what we had was enough. And the whole time, you were running to someone else. Telling her things you never told me. Being present for her in ways you never were for me. Alicia, I'm sorry, okay? Is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry it happened, but you can't exactly blame me for looking elsewhere when you were always so checked out. I was checked out because you never gave me anything to check into. Every conversation was surface level, every plan was tentative, every promise was conditional. I thought that was just who you were, but now I realize it was just who you were with me. The words hung in the air, more honest than anything I had ever said to Joel in our entire relationship. Diana shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and I realized with satisfaction that she was hearing truths she had probably convinced herself were not true. Evan took over then, his voice controlled, but his eyes blazing. Diana, we built a life together. 7 years of shared dreams, shared struggles, shared everything. And you threw it away for what? A man who was too cowardly to leave his own girlfriend? A relationship built entirely on lies and sneaking around? You were never there, Diana shot back. Always working, always focused on some deal or project. I needed someone who actually saw me. I saw you. I just didn't worship you the way Joel did. And apparently, that wasn't good enough. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through accusations and deflections and occasional moments of brutal honesty. By the end, nothing had been resolved. Not really, but something had shifted. The power dynamic that had once favored Joel and Diana, the secrecy that had given them control, was gone. They were just 2 people who had made terrible choices, facing the consequences of those choices in real time. When we finally left the restaurant, Evan and I walked in silence for several blocks, processing what had happened. Then, without warning, we both started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity of the situation had finally become too much to contain. Well, Evan said finally, that was cathartic and terrible. Pretty much sums up the last month of my life. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. Alicia, I know this has all been chaos, and I know we're both still healing. But I need you to know that meeting you has been the only good thing to come out of this disaster. Evan, I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the vulnerability he was trying to hide. Meeting you has been the only good thing for me too. And maybe that's crazy, considering how we met. But I've decided I'm done letting fear make my decisions for me. He kissed me then, really kissed me, and it felt like the beginning of something I had been waiting for without knowing it. We stood there on that sidewalk in the gathering dusk, 2 broken people choosing to believe that broken could become something beautiful. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sun set over the Portland skyline and thinking about how much had changed. The consulting firm I had always dreamed of was finally real. A small operation with a handful of clients who believed in my vision. I had started writing again, essays about reinvention and second chances that had actually found an audience online. I had traveled to 3 countries and had plans for a dozen more. and Evan was beside me, where he had been almost every day since that confrontation at the restaurant. His divorce was finalized, the house sold, the last remnants of his old life packed away in boxes he rarely opened. We had moved slowly, both of us learning to trust again, both of us building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping an arm around my waist. "About how different everything looks from here." "Different good or different terrifying?" "Both. Maybe that's the point." He kissed my temple, a gesture that had become familiar and beloved. "Have you heard anything from Joel lately?" "Not directly, but apparently he and Diana broke up a few months ago. Turns out a relationship built on lies doesn't hold up so well when the lies aren't fun anymore." "Karma," Evan said simply. "Maybe. Or maybe they just ran out of people to betray." I thought about Joel sometimes, usually in quiet moments when the past crept up unexpectedly. Not with anger anymore, not really, more with a distant curiosity, wondering what his life looked like now, whether he had learned anything from the wreckage he had caused. I doubted it, honestly. Some people never do. "I ran into Diana's sister last week," Evan mentioned. "She said Diana's been struggling, lost her job, bounced between a few apartments, can't seem to hold anything together. Do you feel bad for her?" "Not as much as I probably should. She made her choices. We all live with the consequences of our choices." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Joel's life had apparently followed a similar trajectory. Last I heard from mutual friends, he had been fired from his job for performance issues and was living in a tiny apartment on the other side of the city, cycling through dating apps with no success. The charming facade that had fooled me for so long was harder to maintain, it seemed, when there was no one willing to be fooled. But I did not dwell on their misfortune. That was not what this journey had been about, not really. The revenge I had wanted in those early days, the desire to see them suffer the way I had suffered, had faded into something less consuming. What replaced it was far more powerful. I had built a life I was genuinely proud of, had become a person I actually liked, had found love in the most unexpected place. "Thank you," I said to Evan. "For what?" "For walking into that cafe. For telling me the truth when you could have handled everything alone. For seeing something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself." He turned me to face him, his eyes warm in the fading light. "You were always that person, Alicia. You just needed someone to remind you." We stood there, as the last of the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had been broken and rebuilt, who had chosen each other out of chaos and somehow made it work. My world had blown open that day in the cafe, and for months afterward I had been terrified of what that meant. But standing here now, on the other side of all that pain, I understood the truth I had been too scared to accept. Sometimes the life you think you want is just the life you've settled for, and sometimes it takes everything falling apart to realize what you actually deserve. Joel and Diana had taught me that lesson, though not in the way they intended. They had shown me what I did not want, what I refused to become, what I would never settle for again. And in their destruction, I had found my own construction. Looking at Evan, at the life we were building together, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the stranger who had ambushed me with the truth. Gratitude for the courage I had found to walk away. Gratitude for the woman I had become in the aftermath of betrayal. "Ready to go inside?" Evan asked. I smiled, taking his hand. Ready for whatever comes next. And I was. For the first time in my life, I truly was. As for Joel and Diana, the consequences of their selfishness continued to compound. Joel's reputation in our industry never recovered once word spread about what he had done, leaving him scrambling for freelance work that barely covered his bills. Diana, stripped of the security she had taken for granted, found that her looks and charm only got her so far without the substance to back them up. They had both been forced to start over, but unlike me, they were starting from places of shame rather than strength. The universe had a way of balancing things out, and their balance had finally come due. Standing beside Evan that evening, watching the first stars appear, I realized my world had not blown open because of their betrayal. It had expanded because I had finally stepped into a life I chose for myself, with my eyes wide open and my heart ready for whatever came next.